All right, everybody, this is Sweta Regmi, career and personal branding strategist, joining you live from Canada. I have a guest, Hilke Schellmann, joining in live from US as well, author of Algorithm and assistant professor of journalism and in New York University. She's a keynote speaker, Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist, and she's going to share all the strategies today, how to get hired. And you know what? People are getting fired as well, left and right, because of AI algorithm. And she's done it all, the homework. Welcome to my show, Hilke. Tell us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to try to help folks the best as we can, like sort of understanding how to get hired in the age of AI.
I know, right? How to get hired, but not to get fired, correct?
Yes.
And how to get
I mean, we
promoted.
definitely see like most of these tools are being used in the hiring sphere, and then they also used to monitor employees. And now we start to seeing that some of these AI-driven signals are also used for firing. Happy to talk about all of that.
Obviously, and you've done such a great testing out there. You're going to share the live stories today, and I'm super excited about it. Now, what made you write this book all about algorithm? I'm kind of fascinated by this.
It kind of found me. So I was, I was just being a professor. I went to a conference with lawyers in Washington, D.C. in 2017. And I took like a cab ride, like a Lyft ride from the conference back to Union Station to catch a train. And I was talking to the driver and I asked him, like, how are you doing? How was your day? And he was like, oh, I had a weird day. And I was like, what? Tell me more. I'm a journalist. I'm like very nosy. And the poor driver was like, oh yeah, totally. He's like, it's such a weird day. I was interviewed by a robot. He had applied to a baggage handler position at a local airport. And, he got like a phone call and a quote unquote robot, like a pre-recorded voice, ask him questions. And I noted down, I was like, interviews by robots, so fascinating. Never heard of it. And then I started digging and I really found out that this is like very prevalent, especially in the United States and some other countries, right? That like for hourly work in like hospitality and fast food and in retail, a lot of the application is streamlined, digitized. AI is being used on folks, and we see it more and more. We saw, Delta Airlines used AI for hiring flight attendants, and we've seen like a school district using it to hire teachers. So we see it broadening and broadening out. And I think lots of folks didn't realize what is happening in this space. I went to some of these HR tech conferences, right? They're like 10,000 people who work in HR, hundreds of vendors, they all have AI. Everyone is buying these AI tools. But when I spoke to job applicants who did like one-way video interviews where you get pre-recorded questions on your phone or on your computer and you just record yourself answering, right? Like there's no other person on the other side. People always thought that like a human recruiter watches those videos. All the job applicants I've ever talked to, and that may be true, but there's definitely a lot of AI solutions out there too that just read out the words that people use and make an inference who is possibly going to be successful at the job. I just realized a lot of job applicants are not prepared or don't know enough about this new world that we are in.
Absolutely.
And so I thought, let's put it in a book. Like there's a lot going on, like we see AI being used in like the whole, HR folks call it like the life cycle of employees, right? From hiring to current workers. We see AI being used on continuous social media background checks. So companies monitoring their workers' social media to check if they're maybe have like signals of racism, of toxic behavior. And then we see it being used to monitor what everyone does on their computer or in the warehouse. And then we see it now too, that companies use AI signals to possibly fire workers. So it's used all along the gamut of the world of work. So I thought like it's a lot and we need to bring it all together and let people know what's happening.
Absolutely. And we need to be very transparent about the process. And I recall during my hiring days as a hiring manager, I came from the financial institutions and we had all these tests, but I never recall going through the AI one-way video interview, thankfully, back in 2017. And we definitely had personality tests where managers were sent the scoring and say, hey, you know what, this is the right fit. And I don't know, honestly, as a hiring manager, how do they come up with it? They've never involved us at all with the vendors. All we got was the score. And they said they're the cultural fit. And probably that was based on the top performer, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And when they come in, they're not matching me with the employee that I'm hiring. They're matching from the fit perspective. And I found it was total bias. And because it could change from the leadership to leadership environment, how are they measuring? Do you have any thought on that kind of test?
Yeah. And actually, I'm very glad that, like, we saw culture fit algorithms come up in like 2018, 2019. And I'm glad a lot of companies have abandoned them because there could be so much racial bias built into them. Like, what's cultural fit? Like, do you need to look and act like the people who are already in the job? So that doesn't really make a lot for diversity, bringing in new people. Like, diversification of workforce doesn't work if you try to hire the same people again and again as a culture fit. But we see, the use of personality tests is just so vast, especially in the United States, to understand who the people are. And, there's a lot of concerns. So one concern is that, like, it turns out personality is not very predictive for how successful you be at the job, right? Because you have like maybe one personality that comes out in the test, but we as humans can overcome our like personality restrictions, right? It turns out I'm actually quite shy, and I had to like train myself to be like more outgoing, approach people at like, sort of formal functions. Like, I was always happy to speak with people as a journalist because, that's kind of my job. But when I was at these like receptions and like awkward functions, I had to like train myself to overcome my personality. And that's like the beauty of humans, right? So maybe your personality test means that you're this kind of person, but you could actually actively work against that and, overcome those obstacles. And also, like, our personality dictates about 5 to 10% of our success in a job. So that's very, very little. So we really shouldn't be looking at that. But here's the big but, because companies do want to know, like, they want to look under the hood of applicants, right? Like, you present yourself in your material, but they really want to know, who are you really? Like, who is the non-curated Hilke Schellmann behind all the beautiful words she has chosen, right? So they want to look under the hood, and they feel like, oh, if I use a personality test, I get to know the candidate, and they can't fake this. But the truth is, like, personality tests are actually pretty controversial. In psychology, some of them, I've tested some, and some use the DISC, and that's a personality test that even the DISC people who put out the test say do not use for hiring. This is not a tool for hiring, but people use it in hiring, unfortunately. So it's not a good use. And sometimes, we see questions that sort of almost veer into medical territory, like asking people potentially about their mental health struggles, and that's like really prohibited information in the United States. Like, that is private. So I think there's a lot of concerns. And then we see personality tests that don't even ask you about are you the life of the party, but you play games that are supposed to pull out your personality, and they're calibrated. Folks who are currently in the job play the game, and whatever their characteristics are. Maybe you have like 50 accountants, you want to hire new accountants, and they all play the game, and they're all like risk takers for whatever reason, right? Those 50 accountants at your job are risk takers. So then incoming applicants who play these AI games are being compared to the incumbents, and sort of looked at like, well, are you a risk taker? So there's a couple of things, like, right, is pumping a balloon, which I had to do for my risk-taking ability, does that actually have to do with anything on the job? No one is pumping balloons unless they do, they have a party business.
Mm-hmm.
But like, that's one question. Then also, like, what does like, maybe I'm a total maverick in AI games, right? I'm like totally risk taker, but am I really a risk taker in the real world? It's not very clear. And also then the other question is like, is risk taking actually part of the job, right? Do accountants actually have to be risk takers,
Mm-hmm.
or is this just some random thing that they all have in common? And the same question is like, how are you going to diversify if you're just trying to hiring the same people based on the personality of the people who are already there, right? And does the personality actually matter that much? So I think there's a lot of things that are really questionable in the realm of hiring, and I want to help job applicants, but I also want to help HR folks to be more skeptical, to question some of these tools that their company asked them to use, and really think through, like, is there science behind here? Is this fair? Like, are we actually doing a fair thing here to job applicants.
That's a great point. And I love the pointer on DEIB. For those of you who do not know the acronym, diversity, equity, inclusion, and the belonging has been added to, and there is something else added to. So, that's exactly what my thing is. As an immigrant, I'm an immigrant in Canada, moved in when I was at 20. And lived in States for a bit, and I moved here. You can hear me out. I have accent. English is not my first language.
Yeah, me too.
Right,
Yeah.
And I know that when I actually looked through one of the top employer here, I looked at that. And I saw right away the red flag on it. They said AI video interview. Okay, fine. Then I'm looking at it. How you can be rated was verbal communications. And I was taken back. And the role, Hilke, it's not even the role that you would probably be client facing. It's probably technical. And I see back end and operations and everything. And everyone is going through it, students and, the performer who's been in the business for a while. And I thought about myself, and I tagged the media, and we had an interview. Nola is listening as well. Give me hands up, Nola, so people know that we've done the podcast together. And we were cracking down on these kind of tools. Who's auditing in Canada? Where's the compliance body? Who's protecting people like us who have accent? We have huge accent bias all around the world, even within the English-speaking community. And we're going to move on to the second segment now is how does AI decide who gets hired? If you have any example that you've tested personally.
Yeah, I did. So
yes.
I like putting myself in the shoes of job applicants. Like, how do these tools work? Like, how do job applicants interact with them? How does it make you feel to do a video interview, right? How does it feel? I was kind of nervous for a lot of these tests. And, afterwards, when I was like looking at my personality traits that are allegedly pulled out of my social media, one on LinkedIn, one on my Twitter, I had like opposite personalities, and I was like, okay, I don't think this tool really works. Why was I so nervous? But it's kind of like somebody's looking under the hood of you. So I'm also really concerned because, maybe because I'm an immigrant too in the US. I'm originally from Germany. German is my first language, and I always wondered, because in video interviews, what the tool does in most cases, right? They're a little bit different AI tools, but we've seen like facial expression analysis, intonation of the voice. Luckily, because there's no basis in science, those have gone a little bit out of fashion. They're still there, but not as many. But what we see now is that a lot of the video interviews, if AI is used, it will take the audio from the video interview and transcribe it into text. And then the computer will analyze the text and sort of infer, are you a team player? Would you be successful at the job based on different, sort of traits and dimensions? And one thing I've always wondered is like, what is with people maybe who have accents, who have a speech disability, right? Like, is the computer actually, quote unquote, understanding the words as well as others? So we actually have a pretty big body of work that transcription tools that are used, they're also used in Amazon, in Echoes and Alexas, they're used in our phones, and a lot of folks with disabilities use them to communicate with the outer world. They're not as good. They don't pick up words as well as from folks who speak, who have an accent, or a speech impairment. Also, folks who speak, maybe something like a dialect or African American vernacular, like these, because the tools are often trained on, maybe native English speakers, and so folks with accent, they're just less dominant in those. In the training data. So I tested a tool. I went to HR Tech, and one of the tools was marketed to Western companies saying, hey, do you want to hire call center employees overseas in the global South usually, right? And one of the criteria that they have to have is that they need to speak English, because, they're going to interact with the English speaking customers. So I was like, wow, this is cool. Interesting. This tool is going to find out how well I speak English. So I, you get a phone call from the AI interviewer, Christine, and she asked you a bunch of questions. And first I answered in English, and I sort of talked about my job experience. I did just a normal interview, and I got an 8.5 out of 9. And I was labeled English competent. And I was like, wow. it's a great tool. I found out that, I really, I have a knack for English, and, look at me excelling. And then I thought, let's test the tools. And when I talk to vendors, they always tell me, oh, if somebody has an accent or they have a speech impairment and the tool, quote unquote, cannot understand them, they have to reach a certain threshold. And if they don't reach that, the AI tool will send them to a human recruiter, and they maybe have like a two-way interview. And there would be some sort of, error message. So I was like, okay, let me just test the tool and speak to it in German, which is my native language. And so I answered all the questions, and I didn't even actually say anything in German related to the job. I just read the Wikipedia entry on psychometrics, psychometry, in German. And, I sent it off, and then I got an email, and I was shocked. I got a 6 out of 9 English competency, and I was scored competent in English. And I was like, I didn't say a word in English. I just spoke German. Like, how on earth does this tool not recognize that I didn't speak the target language, but then also gave me a competency score that I was competent? Like, I would have been gone to the pile, I would have made it to the next round. And I was like, how is that possible that these tools do not work as advertised at all? Like, that seems pretty unfair. So I think those are kinds of things that I tested, and I'm now working with like a computer scientist and a sociology professor to actually test thousands of audio snippet of folks who are have a speech impairment and folks who don't have a speech impairment, and to understand, like, are they actually being picked up at similar rates, or does one have a higher error rate in these transcription tools? And the truth is, like, there aren't a lot of regulatory agencies that do this kind of benchmarking and checking. Are these tools fair? Are they not? Like, anyone can build a tool and put it on the market today. And I think that's, I have a lot of thoughts about that. I tested another tool similarly that, did take my intonation of my voice and the words that I speak. And I spoke to it in German again. And what happened, it actually made a transcript. And in the transcript, it's total gibberish. It's like nematode, sociology, does it iron? I mean, it's like, makes no sense with this transcript made out of me speaking German, because obviously it tried to connect the German sounds to some English words, right? But like, and I was scored 73% match to the job. And I was like, this is total gibberish. Like, I didn't do an interview. This is pretty crazy. So I got on the phone with the developers, and they were like, oh no, the tool totally got that you didn't speak English, but your intonation of your voice was like 73% match. And I was like, the intonation of my voice, what does that have to do with the job? Like, there's no science underneath here. So I do have a lot of questions about these tools and how we're using them on humans. And I try to tell vendors and companies that I was like, hiring matters. Like, it's a high stakes decision making. Like, I care about the job that I have, right? Like, most of us need to work to make money, to put a roof over our heads, and feed our children. And also, like, I think a lot about, like, my job is certainly part of my identity, right? Like, a lot of us want a job that is fulfilling and make us thrive in the world. And it matters if we get a job. And I would be, I'd be sad if I don't get a job because I'm not qualified, or there's a more qualified candidate. But I would be really upset if I don't get a job because a faulty algorithm didn't work out, or like tossed me aside because I didn't have the word baseball on my resume, right? Like something that has nothing to do with the job. I would be really upset. And I've talked to job applicants who applied for their dream jobs, encountered an AI screen and got rejected. And, we don't know why. I don't know if that tool worked or not. I have no idea. But, it's really sad. And they couldn't get a second chance. And, they had to move on. And so I do think we really need to take a closer look at these tools.
Absolutely. And I was talking to one of the clients, and he said he was in IT. When I was coaching him, it came up that they built the software for testing for IT people. And the AI would track down if the eyes were moving somewhere else as well, and it would be potentially considered they were cheating. So they're not allowed to look somewhere else. So there's an AI catch there too. It's like, how do you know? Because a lot of people, maybe there are neurodiverse people. And as you said, maybe there's something with the speech disabilities, anything like that? How are you going to accommodate those people when it comes to that one-way AI interview or testing, even the testing sometime? I honestly am not good at testing in the certain things that it's outside of my expertise.
Yeah.
And giving me that, like the balls, whatever theory that you went through, I would fail it, even though I'm an expert on the job. Like, how am I going to do something that I have no clue on? Someone gives me video games to play, I would just be like, I'm done with this. I don't want this role because I have no idea how to play the video games, right? And I think that's really not fair. They do have to provide the accommodations earlier. And I think the solution could be the options are this or this. And I know that some top employers actually started to do that, even the written one, right? So if you are coming up to the face-to-face round, they have said, okay, this is a written round for you, send it in, and then that makes people feel better, because some people are really good at writing, some people are really good at verbal communication as well. And again, going back to the DEIB, which is, if you're trying to hire a cultural fit, you're trying to hire the similar mindset, and you're lacking that DEI initiative altogether, because we are a cultural ad, whether we're an immigrant, whether we speak second languages, whether there's a disability, whether we are part of some kind of community, right? So that compromises the DEIB process. And I am extremely happy that you've done the testing, and this is why you're here today, to share some kind of the things that came up from speaking with a whistleblower. I know
And
in the book you talked about faulty AI tools. I'm so interested in finding this out. In your book, you said, what are the examples provided by whistleblowers who shared results of the faulty AI, and then algorithm. Facial expression was one thing, and tools that predict from our voices if we are depressed or anxious. Like, do you have any example for that?
I do have an example. So this is something that I've looked at. This was used. It's called vocal biomarkers, and it's sort of a new science wave that looks at, like, can AI tools pull out information about a diagnosis of maybe about our mental state just of our voices speaking. And a company, there's a bunch of startups, and one of the companies used it on students during the pandemic at Menlo College in California. And the students could pick up their phone and leave 30 seconds voicemail, quote unquote, and say like, oh, my day is this, and then the tool would score you how anxious or depressed you are today, and sort of give you possibly some help. And I think if that is being used in the workforce, I think a lot of these things, companies want to help folks and their employees, and it seems like a great idea. But I also feel like it could be that then your manager looks at all your results and feels like, oh, this person is depressed, and if there's layoffs, maybe they're gonna get rid of the depressed people, right? And we've seen this before. Like, once you have the data, it's really, really hard to ignore it. So when I talked to an analyst, he said he talked to a lot of companies, and one of the companies that he talked to, they did swipe in data to look for folks they need to promote who are superstars, and that was just based on how many hours a day you spend at your desk. And I was like, that's already a dubious way to think about who's successful at the job, because I can sit at my desk for 10 hours and do nothing, right? Like, you always really have to look at the results, not at like swipe in data who's longest at their desk, because people with disabilities, and especially people who are caregiving obligations, that are often mothers, right? Like, they can't actually sit at a desk for 12 hours. So that's kind of unfair. But then what also happened is, when the pandemic hit and the company had to do layoffs, they wanted to look at that data too, and lay off the people that didn't spend a lot of time at their desks. But it's like, wait, but what if they go through a sickness or a loved one is sick? Like, they might still be good, really good employees. Like, I feel like a lot of times we forget that, like, these are just signals that we can track, right? Because we have the technology to track, but is it actually meaningful? And I doubt that sometimes, right? And with the vocal biomarkers, like, I think there's something there, but we don't actually know if the technology works. And I think that's sort of the problem. The technology maybe not be working, but companies use it anyways. And I think that's where a lot of the problem comes from. And for your question about the whistleblower, so I was in a very, very lucky position that I had some folks who, often are being brought in. So if a vendor, they advertise a tool, a company, maybe, a large company wants to use the tool, they may bring in like outside counsel, like employment lawyers and others, maybe to look at the technology and see, what's the privacy concerns, should we use the tool? And I spoke to those people, and they couldn't tell me. They all had to sign non-disclosure agreements. They couldn't tell me exactly what company, but they could tell me what went wrong. So a couple of them looked at resume screeners. That companies use. You send in your application, and for a lot of companies, they get hundreds or thousands of applications per role. So, for example, a company like Google gets about 3 million applications a year. There's not enough humans to go through all of these resumes, right? And also, like, I have to say, humans are pretty biased in hiring too, so we may not want to go back to that. So companies use technological solutions, and the problem is, what some of my sources have found was really disturbing. So like one, for example, found that in a resume screener, the tool used the word Africa or African American as a sort of sign of something, as a meaningful word. So if you had the word Africa or African American on your resume, you either get upgraded or downgraded, and that's a real problem. That's about your like ethnic identity. That has nothing to do if you were skilled for the job, right? And that's what we really care about. Like, we should hire people based on their skills and abilities. And if you can do the job, if you have the skills, not the hair color, not your skin color, like your hobbies, none of that has anything to do with how good you're on the job. But resume screeners, especially AI tools, right? They're not, they don't understand. They just look for like statistical patterns. So they find out, one of my sources found out that the name Thomas was a predictor of success, because probably in the pile of resumes of the folks that are currently working at the company, there are probably, 5 Thomases in there, right? So it's statistically significant. But obviously, if you name Thomas, it doesn't, it doesn't qualify you for anything. Sorry to all the Thomases. What qualifies you is the skills and the trades and your experience on the job, right? And so we found another thing that was sort of points to gender discrimination, where one of my sources found that the resume screener had given folks who had the word baseball on their resume more points, and had downgraded folks who had the word softball on their resume, downgraded them. So in the United States, there's probably mostly men would put baseball on their resume, and women would put softball, because women usually play softball, right? So what it might have, something that looks like totally benign, might actually be a marker of gender discrimination. So we see some of that. And I think that's really disturbing. And, the companies and the vendors themselves didn't find this, right? It was like outside counsel who came in and did this, right? Like, you would think that the vendors maybe find these kinds of problems. So if a company never looks at these tools and just buys them, they may never uncover this. And what's also kind of problematic is, like, the vendors are not going to tell us that they have problems with the algorithms, right? But also the companies that use it, especially in the US, are so freaked out that there might be a class action lawsuit, because if, a large company uses a faulty AI screener for all the resumes that come in, right? And, they make that public, there might be hundreds of thousands or even millions of people that potentially have a claim of discrimination. So they're not going to tell us. So there's very little progress that, we can actually root out problematic technologies and say, like, hey, let's not do that, but do that. That is more fair, right? So I think that's another problem. It's not a conspiracy. It's just like the way the system is sort of set up, that it doesn't lead to transparency. So I think we need to push lawmakers to ask for more transparency in this space.
Absolutely. And you bring the valid point. And I know, like, company like Amazon not too long ago, it found there was a gender bias in there, and they tried to fix it, and they gave up, and they totally scratched it because they're rating. And probably this was one of the factor in a tech sector. There were literally, there's a biases that was found, and they couldn't fix it, and they decided to toss it out and go with something else. And I know there's a resume screener out there. It would score you Now, I know there are recruiters, they're going to say, we absolutely check out everything before we reject you, or there's no tool to reject you. And I get it. There's a knockout questions and everything, and we're not going to talk about it. But I think when I go as a hiring manager, I've used one of the tools in the banking sector. When I went in there, when I'm typing specific word on it, so I don't know how the vendors are giving me that Boolean search when I'm typing the skill, hard skills. I don't know, to your point, what's coming up. Am I seeing Thomas all the time? Did I think about it? Why am I just getting Thomas for the role that I'm hiring for?
Yeah.
Right? And that's what we're challenging, not like recruiters, you don't do your job. We're not challenging that. We're challenging how the vendors are putting a biases without even knowing it. And as per you, you're telling me that it's not even people, an employer, they found out, it's a council they found out, right?
Yeah, it's outside people that the company brought in. It's not like coming up just because they keep monitoring the system. It came up because they brought in outside counsel to take a look under the hood. And I think that points to some of the things that I actually agree. And, I think the problem is that often these systems, they keep working, right? You still get rankings of people, the system works, quote unquote, but you're not seeing if it's biased. Like, who are the people that were rejected, whose resumes were rejected? It's not that you really see them, or people look at, going to study those hundreds of resumes that were being rejected. So I think, it's a little different than, my phone either makes phone calls or not, and I know it's broken or not. Like, these tools, they keep ranking people. But it's unclear actually, like, how are they ranking it? And if some of the companies, we see that in job platforms, for example, ZipRecruiter uses deep neural networks, and other companies use that too. So we know the training data, what we put in, we sort of see the results, but we have to audit the results. But we don't really know how the AI tools actually make inferences and predict if somebody should be at the top of the list for a recruiter or at the bottom of the list. And the developers themselves don't often know that. And I think that's sort of really problematic when we don't know why an individual was put on like rank 1 or rank 30, or was rejected, and no one knows. And if we don't really look closely and monitor these systems, we can really have bias built in. And the employment lawyers and folks who are sort of adjacent to employment lawyers that I spoke to, one said he looked at 5 resume screeners, all of them had biased variables. Another one said, well, he said in about a fourth of all of the tools he looked at, there was problematic variables that are being used. So I guess it's somewhat common, and I've now talking to so many people in companies, HR managers who tried out a technology and then they found a problem and they abandoned it. So it's not every tool, but it's pretty out there. So we do want to be really careful. And I think what I've learned from recruiters that is actually really helpful, that I think a lot of recruiters are actually now looking often at skills. So, if they are on LinkedIn or other job platforms, they might type in, maybe they're looking for a software developer in New York. So they would put in like software developer in New York and some of the skills like Python, Hadoop, or I don't know, whatever programming language. And I think that is actually really helpful to find people, because if we just look at skills and maybe not the schools that you graduated from, which could tell me more about your socioeconomic background than actually how good you are, I think the focus on skills is pretty good. That's a good development.
That's right. Focusing on the hard skills versus soft skills. Again, soft skills could change based on the environment, leadership skills, and where you are at your life too, right? So one of the things that you talked about in your book was algorithm scanning our online activity. And I was like, okay, I researched on it. And one time I was looking at the blog, the guy, it came in on the reference check. He passed it. And later on a reference check, when the algorithm did the reference check later on online, social media branding, he found out that he failed on that. And after, going through back and forth, escalating the issue, what the algorithm did was, if the guy liked some kind of pictures, like the holding the bear, or he was holding the bear, or like, commenting on, the things, it was really hot, like politics and stuff like that, that was a really sensitive topic, algorithm rated him down as well. So do you have those example as well from the whistleblowers that you've talked to?
I didn't talk to any whistleblowers, but I did I talk to whistleblowers in that realm? No, but I looked at some of the tool and tested them myself. Oh, and I actually did talk to someone so they're an employee who had to reapply for a job because they had some, system changes, and the company used an AI tool that made inferences about their social media usage, and they actually asked the company for the data. So they got hundreds of pages and saw that, for example, some tweets that they liked about, like, I don't know, a toddler running through Whole Foods with a bottle of liquor, and was, I don't know what they were saying. Like, they liked that tweet, and it was flagged bad for alcohol. And it's like they didn't even write that, and there's no context to it, right? So I think a lot of what we see in this realm is like sort of keywords that maybe AI tools pick up in our social media usage, but there is like total context lacking, right? Like, are you really a violent person as the AI infers, or are you just quoting like a rap song, right? Like some lyrics. An AI tool is not going to know the difference, and there's not enough humans to go through all of these your social media posts and like rate them and double check if this is working. So I think that is another thing that is problematic.
It's funny how you say it. We go from resume scanning where people are downgraded based on the algorithm. Even if the recruiters are looking for it during the Boolean search, they might not end up because of name or whatever it is, the wording on the keyword of the resume, to now going to the reference check, social media, and to get a promotion as well. They're watching you and you have no idea until that guy asks, right? And now we're going to fail the reference check, even though we are so good at what we do based on the algorithm, and he's most likely not going to get promoted too. This is crazy, right? How the AI
are, I mean, I think it's like, we just don't have a lot of knowledge. And I think that's the same thing with like monitoring employees at work. Like, there's really no law that prevents that in the United States. And really, we also have case law that's very clear that anything that is done on a work issued computer does belong to the company. So you really have no right to privacy. There was a huge push during the pandemic, right? Like, a lot of people started working at home. A lot of managers freaked out. Like, is my employee actually productive, right? Like, are they actually working? So, the technology was already there to like, maybe record every keystroke, every URL you're visiting, right? Every website, it can check for that. And some software can now make that into productive and unproductive and send reports to your employer. The software can also make inference. If you update your LinkedIn a lot, you might be at flight risk. If you print a lot, if you move around data, onto your Google Drive, like anything, if you put in a USB stick to your computer, all of that can be reported. And I was surprised I didn't do that research, but the New York Times did, and they found out that 8 of the 10 largest companies in the United States do track monitor some of their workers. And we obviously know this a lot from warehouses and delivery drivers, right? They're often the canary in the coal mine, that they're being tracked everywhere they go, right? Like, every turn they take is being recorded if they're idling somewhere. And we see also that folks who work in warehouses, if they fall for a long time or a few times under a certain productivity rate, they might get fired, right? Like, and then that seems like this is an AI signal, and they and companies use that to almost somewhat automatically fire people. Same with delivery drivers, right? We see that with folks who have like maybe low satisfactory rates, or they didn't get to drop off a package, and maybe they had a flat tire, right? Or maybe the homeowner didn't open. Like, there's all kinds of possible explanations, but AI isn't really good with picking up explanations. Same with sentiment, right? Like, it can't actually infer what sarcasm is or any of that. So that's really problematic that we see. And I see this sort of like a lot of CEOs talk about, we want agile employees, we want creative employees, culturally sensitive, people with teamwork. But then they also have this ability to now track people. And it's really hard to, I guess, not do that, because you do want to know if your people are working, but actually sitting at your desk and like hitting your keyboard doesn't really make you productive, right? So I do think these might be the wrong signals that we are tracking, but nonetheless, they're being tracked.
My God. Yeah, I come from that environment in the field, contact center. Everything is tracked. And I could see I managed the team who were coaching, who were quality analysts and coaching, and they monitor social media and everything like that as well from the client interaction perspective. So when the agents were taking calls, we could literally see the strokes and where did they go, So let's say, I'm checking. We could see everything as a manager, as a QA as well, and everything gets tracked down. We could see their chat and everything, and they're made on onboarding process. They have to sign it saying that we can electronic disclosure needs to be signed. Now, especially in Ontario right now, it's been introduced. If the employers have more than 25 employees or something, you have to get that consent. It's been regulated, I believe. And there are things that, in Ontario, Canada, we are moving ahead with these kind of pieces to protect the employee. But again, it's not for everybody out there, and employees are really freaking out. Like, what's being tracked? I don't even know. When I put the TikTok videos and people are coming at me, how do I know?
And let me push back on that, because, I think often we consent to things, but I call it sort of like forced consumerism or for forced consent a little bit, right? Because if I apply for a job and they ask me to do a video interview, am I going to say no? Like, I want the job. Like, am I going to start a fight with the software? Because often there isn't even an HR person, right, that answers the emails. Like, am I going to start a fight with that? No, I'm going to take the video interview, right? Like, and sort of the same thing when I start a new job, I'm onboarding, I'm sitting at my desk for the first time, new computer, and it asks me all kinds, and it's like, hey, just so you know, this Google Drive is part of the company. Okay, yes, I'm just going to say yes. Like, am I going to start arguing in my first day at the job? And I think a lot of us just say like, okay, sure, yeah, it's the companies, but then we don't realize that literally anything can be tracked on that. And a lot of times it gets tracked and no one looks at it, but now we have AI tools that can sort of infer malicious intent and say like, oh, you're at flight risk, you're moving data over, maybe you're going to leak something, or, you're going to take data to a competitor. And, we may actually totally forget that, we are being tracked, or we actually never really understood. So I'm glad there's regulation. I think it just needs to be maybe a little bit more aggressive to actually help employers. And I always suggest to employees, like, it might be helpful to have a second screen. Like, if you want to, I don't know, call someone or make a purchase online while you're at work, maybe use your phone or use a second device, because a company can literally track anything. And I don't know if most of us are sophisticated enough to understand if we have a tracker on our software built in, right? Like, most of us wouldn't know that.
For sure. Anything company gives you, they're monitoring you. They have every right to do it, even if they don't disclose it on certain parts, right? And you bring the valid point. Once you, you know what? Challenging comes with the privilege as well, right? I'm not going to do that video interview. I'm not going to go to multiple rounds. I'm not going to be interviewed by AI. It absolutely comes with the privilege at where you are in your life. Are you desperate? Can you afford this? So many things. And mostly for people of color and, underrepresented community, we don't have that large network. We don't have that privilege, to be honest, right? And it's
push back, but also it's probably futile to push back against a video interview, because who are you going to push back to? But also, I get it. To actually say, I'm not gonna take on this opportunity. Like, a lot of us are not in that position to say no. Like, we don't get to make those decisions or push back, or even have the time, right? A lot of people, they barely can fit in a video interview in their busy schedules. They have to work to put food on the table. So this is just nothing they can comprehend. So I do think that I think unions will be really helpful, and I'm trying to talk to a lot of unions and figure out, if they can put some of these things into collective bargaining agreements, right? Like, they ask the companies for disclosure or even consent from the union if some of these tracking devices are being used in employees, right? And then I think there would be transparency, and the union would actually get a vote on this. So I think, and if we had lawmakers who also would start new regulations and new laws around this, I think that would be wonderful. And we see a little bit of that, like the National Labor Relations Board in the US has actually been somewhat aggressive thinking about some of this, and thinking about unionizing activity in the United States is legal, and you cannot be retaliated by an employer. An employer is not allowed to meddle with that. So it could be if an employer has an AI tool that reads all emails, or, like sort of analyzes them. It's not, the tool can't really read. That could, it could pick up on union activity, and that would be illegal. So we see some hope of pushback, but we haven't seen any laws change. So
that's a great solution to it. So in order to wrap this up, and maybe we can take questions in a couple of minutes, but one last question for you. I'm going to invite people on the stage. Raise your hand. She's been very gracious to stay here. We committed to half an hour, and now we're here. I feel like we need almost part 2 on it.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about it. I also think that like what might be helpful for job applicants is to really think, does my resume pass an AI screen? Meaning, we used to say to people, you really want to stand out. You want these like beautiful colors and maybe images on you, not photos, but like, sort of kind of cool things on your resume. But now it's all about like getting through the first rounds, and that's often a machine screen, an AI screen. So you have to have a machine readable resume, no 2 columns, like probably have a skills section. So the tool definitely picks up your skills, which you want. Also like crisp, clear sentences, anything you can quantify it. And I'm also really hopeful. I think there's a little bit of power that has gone back to applicants with like the advent of ChatGPT, that I think a lot of folks use it to polish their resume, to help them with their cover letter, to be sort of an editor, and, sort of like Grammarly looks at our grammar, right? And our mistakes in writing. So I think this can be really helpful. ChatGPT might also have some helpful hints, what are the most often asked questions in job interviews, what are good answers, right? It helps with practice. So I think that could be really, really helpful for folks.
That's a great question. That's a great one. So yes, and ChatGPT is there, and I'm hearing that employers are implementing to crack down on that as well. So there's a fight going on between employee and employers, right? There's ChatGPT for us as a job seeker, let's say, and there's them on fighting back, saying that why are you using AI tool? I'm like, you've introduced it for us, and why can't we use it? So it's never
exactly. And some people who use maybe even AI or ChatGPT to write their cover letters, they sort of chuckle and say like, oh yeah, it's AI versus AI, and may the best win, right?
That's great.
Because they know that a lot of companies use sort of digital screens to screen resumes.
Perfect. So I'm going to open the floor for questions for a bit. Pushpa, you're the first one. What question do you have for us?
Hi, very good evening. Probably I'm from India, and it was very nice that in depth that you have given us in your talks. I just wanted to understand. See, this then 2 years ago there was SXXW was in the target of a prank marketing campaign that involved in a group of people protesting against being replaced by robots. Okay. And it worked because it tapped into a common sentiment that people have about HR and AI. So in recruiting, for example, you and an AI platform work together to bring in the best candidates. So if you take a look of a pipeline and diversity issues at many companies, unfortunately humans have unconsciously bias which hidden the diversity recruitment. So that's where that's where the machine intelligence platform came, and instead of having biases on AI platforms, only relies of the data that is continually being analyzed and adapting recommendations, right? The most of the recent data, if you see on that one. So how does this artificial intelligence work in this context?
I don't know exactly the context you are talking about, but you're speaking exactly about the marketing language and the hope that a lot of vendors who come into this space with AI tools speak about. They say like, this is going to make hiring more efficient, saves you a lot of money, and it's going to be no bias, and we're going to find the most qualified candidates. So these tools definitely save companies a lot of money. They also make hiring way more efficient. What used to be like 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks now takes days, right? Because you can just send a link to people and they do the video interview within 48 hours and then you get the ranking. But we actually know that like bias keeps coming back, right? Human bias that we have in these tools, like for example, if you use successful employees, like who deemed them successful based on their annual reviews? Well, those are biased against women and people of color. They're underestimated a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we see like bias coming back in, or sort of, if you have a lot of, that was probably the problem at Amazon, right? Like the tool that they used for resume screening was built by the resumes of people who were successful at the company. Well, it turns out they're overwhelmingly male to tech companies. That's a historic bias. So the tool picked up that people who have the word woman or women on their resume have not been successful at Amazon. So those resumes were downgraded. So we see like we can say many times that machines don't have bias, and the machines themselves don't have bias, but they pick up bias that's in the data that we humans produce. And the data is really almost always flawed. So those bias will be replicated unless we start monitoring it, right? And so we see this problem. And I do think that like the problem with some of these resume screeners are that the scope. If there's one hiring manager, they can, how many people can they harm? I mean, I'm really sorry for those people that are harmed, but maybe, they can hire maybe 50 people or so a year. But a faulty resume screener that downgrades everyone who has the word woman on their resume, if that is being used by a large company that has 3 million applicants a year, that is a huge scope of people who could be harmed. So I think that is unprecedented in these tools.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm actually saying is like, I think we should move away from biased human hiring. I'm not saying we should go back to that, because humans are very biased. And, based on if we're hungry or if we had a good day, we hire people different ways. We have huge bias and prejudices about people who don't look like us, who don't act like us. I totally agree. But I'm also saying, like, let's build tools that actually work, and let's think about it. Like, how should we actually hire? What is fair hiring? How could that look like? And I don't think we've seen that. Like, oftentimes companies use these tools to make their life more efficient. They don't want to have more work to monitor these tools and think about these tools. So I think that's some of the problems that I see. So let's build working tools. I'm all for it, that actually work and don't replicate bias.
That's great. So do you want to introduce yourself? Did I pronounce your name right? Please introduce, and I'd be appreciated if you can limit your question to one so we can give more chances to the audience there.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much, guys, for what you're doing. As we really appreciate putting all this experience together. And my question is, if we just realized that the keywords and the social media screening, also the digital behavior approach, it is not being so effective, or at least with the configuration of the machines that we have at this point, it is not being effective. What about changing the approach and trying to teach the machine to have the capacity to analyze if certain competence is on the profile, either than just taking some keywords and making like a decision if it is competent or no?
Yeah. I mean, look, if machines could find out if we are team players, would that be great? But it's actually really hard for, like, machines are not magic, right? They can't really tell, they can only what's on your resume. They assume that you have that competency, right? You put on Python, I assume that you can program Python. And the machine assumes that too. And the machine doesn't know, are you a beginner in Python? Are you like 20 years of experience, right? Like, a machine can't do that. We need other assessments for that. And then also, in general, it is so incredibly hard to find out soft skills, like either by machines or even humans, right? In job interviews, no one has ever said, I'm not a team player, right? If they ask you, like, are you a team player? Probably no one has ever said no. But how am I going to infer that? Are you really a team player, or are you just saying you're a team player in a job interview, right? And how are machines going to find out? So I think I agree with you. That would be great if we could do that. but I'm not sure how to. And I feel very little science, the stuff that I looked at, some of the social media stuff, infers your traits and competencies based on the words that you use. And I don't think there's a whole lot of science there that if I say teamwork and what HireVue told me early on, and I don't know if they still use that, I hope not, but they were talking about if you use we a lot, that means you are going to be rated as a team player. And if you say I a lot, then you are not a team player. You get dinged for that. And it's like, well, but isn't it about context? Maybe I'm talking about a project that I work with many people, or maybe I talk about a situation where I have overcome something. Those kinds of inferences seem very basic and sort of lack a lot of context. So, I mean, I'm all for solutions. I would love to see tools that work. I'd be so thrilled. But I'm not sure we are there yet.
That's a great point. So we're talking about HireVue, who had a facial expression to downgrade people, and then after the backlash, they removed that feature just so people know. So you're rated for
HireVue used like facial expressions and compared that to people who had already done the video interview. And there's there isn't really any science. Like, first of all, like what facial expressions we have to use in a job that make us successful, but even like there's no science to tell us what facial expressions do we have to use in a job interview to be successful, right? And also some of the effective computing tools make inferences on like if you smile, then it's inferred that you're happy, and that's not always true, right? I've smiled in a lot of video interviews or job interviews, and I wasn't happy. I was just nervous and trying to make a connection with someone, right? So we there could be a lot of misfires here. So I think that points to the fairness. A one size at all sounds very democratic, but actually may not be so democratic and fair because some of us are very different. And we need a little bit more different approaches here.
Absolutely. In the interest of time, I know you have to go and I'm keeping you here. Just be quick. Hedayat, can you just go ahead with the questions? Be brief.
Yes, thank you so much, Rita. This was a wonderful discussion and we learned a lot.
Oh, thank you.
Things. So my question is, like, since the employer or employees are new to these AI tools, and what is like the general strategy for the potential workers to use these tools? Sometimes when they are facing or learning or they are interviewing by the robotics or like automatic voice or mail communication or like different communication channels. So, and when they're asking, people is not trusting and they're saying, maybe this is scam, or I don't want to go with this way interaction. I want to talk to someone who is actually someone in the company or being a HR person. So how would be the strategy that people will trust these new tools?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a great efficiency machines for companies. And are they so much worried about how the candidates experience the tools? I don't know. I mean, if they would really listen to job applicants, most job applicants are not a fan of video interviews. And, strategies are hard for me to tell you because we don't actually know exactly how the machines sort of infer if you're a good candidate, right? When they use facial expression analysis, some people thought like looking into the camera will give you high engagement scores, but we don't actually kind of know that. So it's really hard. So we need more transparency. And sadly, what I also found out by talking to some vocational counselors who help people in the United States who have maybe a disability find a job, in the United States, the law that companies need to give reasonable accommodations to people in the hiring process who want it. But the problem is when they ask for it and, they put in an email or called a number, the voicemail was full, they never heard back. And so their clients actually couldn't get an accommodation. So I feel like the system may be broken on many different levels.
Oh, preach what you practice is not there. We talk about DEI being an initiative, and then when it comes to the implementations, we drop the ball on it as an employers, right?
Yeah, sadly, sometimes, yeah. Should we do the last question?
Yes, Farida, go ahead. And we're going to close this out. You're muted, so I don't know. Do you want to unmute yourself? Go ahead.
There we go. Thank you, Sweta and Hilke.
Hilke, yeah, thank you. Yeah,
no problem. So my question is, are there any free or paid tools to basically do a social media audit of our social media? Because I post and comment quite a bit everywhere. So I just don't want it to come back to me in the future or, take me off like a hiring process at any point.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen a tool to self-audit yourself. Some of these companies, one is called Good Egg, the other is called Fama, F-A-M-A, that do social media background check and continuous background check. I don't know if some maybe have a free trial on their website, so you could like test yourself. I know that you can do some video interviews. There's some software out there, and Google put one out, and others, where you can sort of learn how to do video interviews and maybe not feel so awkward not talking to somebody else. And there's definitely tools like JobScan and others where you can check how likely your resume is getting screened, getting through an AI screen. So what you do is like you upload the job description, you load up your resume, and it will tell you, in all likelihood, you are like 60% a match, and you would get to the next round, because it often counts like how many keywords and synonyms of those keywords did you use in your resume. So I always tell people, like, use as many keywords from the job description as you can, but don't use 100%, because a computer might infer that you just copied the job description and throws you out. But you want to have a overlap, and you often, if you can, don't use synonyms, like other words that describe the same thing, because some computers are not calibrated to like sort of understand that like some jobs, some people are providers in healthcare, some are doctors, some are nurses, right? But they kind of often do the same thing, but computers may not know that. So if it says provider in the job description, use that, or medical provider or doctor, use that. And make sure there is an overlap, and those tools might be helpful. I haven't seen that for social media analysis.
That's a great question.
Great point.
Yeah, that great point. So I would just go ahead with Hilke's approach on it. If there's a free trial on it, I'm going to look into it as well. I think when it comes to resume, I think Farida is rocking it with the same strategy, right, Farida? With the keywords.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
I'll see if I can find something. I haven't found something. If there's a free trial, that's how I tested some of the tools that I've tested. I just got a free trial for like 2 weeks, and then played some of the games, and then figured out like, how does it work, what happens. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Farida. That's great. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to close this room out. But thank you. This is exactly what I teach in my resume writing course as well. What to look for, how do you mirror ATS and everything, and how do you stand out to get that interview, and what are the knockout questions you should be looking for as well. It helped me when I got laid off as a hiring manager to bounce back, and that's when it just my whole thing was, why am I not getting interviewed? I'm like, okay, the hiring trend's been changing now. Even as a hiring manager, it was so hard to get an interview, and I figured it out eventually by testing those tools. Well, Hilke, so it was such an honor to come in here.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone to listening in, and also, like, I'm on LinkedIn. There's only one Hilke Schellmann. Please contact me if you have any questions, if you want to chat, if you want to share your experiences, or you just want to follow me for tips, or if I can be of service, I would love to be.
Perfect. So where can people talk about the book briefly? Where can people find your book, and where is it?
I hope anywhere on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's a hardcover version. There's one coming out in the UK next week, so that will cover Europe. But there's also a Kindle ebook. There's an Audible book that I've narrated myself that should be available all over the world. And hopefully, if you have any problems getting the book, just send me a message, and we'll figure it out. I don't know if Amazon and other providers ship to every country in the world, but I think the Kindle book, which is the ebook version, and the audiobook should be available everywhere. And if you have a problem, let me know, and we'll figure something out.
Awesome. For those of you watching, listening for the first time on audio live in LinkedIn, this is available for replay. If you join in a little bit later on, you don't want to miss the golden nuggets. We've been here hanging out together 1 hour with amazing example that you're not going to find it outside. It was a tested and lived experience from both of us. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel, which is Teach and Do which is the YouTube channel. It would be there as well. And if you want to watch the replay, teachinto.com/newsletter. It's on the event page. You would be getting replays soon as well. Also with the AI biases tools that you can use it for free that Hilke talked about it. I actually coach my client on it, how to do the interviews and stuff like that. I'll include that as well, the free tools in there, teachinto.com/newsletter. And I'll give you the free tools out there as well if you subscribe to it. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming in. I hope you have an amazing day or night, wherever you're from.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.